One of the reasons why we are caught up with the problems we have today is that we have people fighting symptoms over and over again and not facing the root of the problem and the real root cause of the symptoms. You can react then to a problem in terms of the root cause or in terms of the symptoms. And we make a differentiation in abnormal psychology then in terms of these two approaches, in terms of what we call a task-oriented response and a defense-oriented response to stress or to a problem. Of course, it's implied by the word, a task orientation implies taking an objective look at a problem and appraising it objectively and solving that problem or preparing to solve it by rational and constructive means and by conscious means. You see, looking at it for what it is, holding one's emotions in abeyance for a while and checking out the problem, and then deciding in a very rational way how that problem is going to be solved. And it's very important that we make that distinction. Often then the solution from a task-oriented point of view involves a change in oneself or in one's surroundings. I often differentiate between the nationalist and the assimilationist, the integrationist, as one whose face is outward and another that face is inward. In the sense that often the assimilationist sees the persuasion of white people as the most important solution to the problem. And I'm going to talk a bit more about that later on, the changing of the attitudes as a solution to the problem of our people, or the changing of white folk in one way or the other. I think one of the principal orientations of the nationalists, though, is to look at internal change. A training of one's own people, a teaching of one's own people, and transforming of one's own people. We often talk about how we have been created by whites and been created by an imperialist system. But we must remember also, ladies and gentlemen, that whites are our creation as well. In the end, this world must be backwards. We must be backwards as a people to be in the condition that we are in. If we are to take lies for truth and truth for lies, that means then we have to be backwards in our orientation to the world. Because to a good extent, a lie is a reversal of the truth. It means then that the whites are dependent on us. We are not dependent on them. The imperialist is dependent upon the subordinate populations, not the other way around. However, the subordinate populations must perceive themselves as being dependent upon the imperialists. Japan has no natural resources to speak of whatsoever. It gets all of its raw materials and everything from outside itself. In straightforward terms, you would think then Japan should be a poor nation. It only survives because of its consciousness. And it's interesting to see how conscious they were about what they were doing. They knew that they were dependent upon their suppliers. Australia, New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, named them one here and one there. And they said, how can we turn our dependency into independency? How can, in a sense, we make those we depend on, dependent on us? And they worked that game on the people on whom they depend. The slave master depends on the slaves. But the slaves must think that their life depends on the master. What am I saying then when I say that? I'm saying then that the whites cannot be what they are if we are not what we are. And that if we can now engage in self-transformation, we will of necessity transform the world. And therefore we don't have to concentrate all our time and energy on trying to persuade whites. We must concentrate our time and energy on self-transformation. It is no way that African people, after having engaged in self-transformation, cannot transform the world. It is impossible, you see. And that's where we must focus. And therefore, if we are a task-oriented people and look carefully at our problems, one of the methods we would use, first and foremost, is that of transforming ourselves and in the process transforming our surroundings. Our actions may be overt and covert. Sometimes they will appear to even be retreating, but in appearance only. Sometimes it would involve direct attack, and other times it would appear to involve compromise. It's one of the things we don't talk about much as a people, strategy. You see, strategy. Strategy is against tactics. We need to talk about that more. We need to study military history. It's very important that we study that. Retreats can effectively defeat armies. War is not all about, Mr. Man running straight forward toward one's enemy. It could involve backing up, stretching an enemy's supply lines, stretching their morale, putting pressure on their morale. It could be a matter of staying out of their way and prolonging the war so that back home the political and social conflicts will begin to create problems. And there's a collapse then in terms of the original country. And in a sense, you literally defeat the army without even fighting it. You're an instant-oriented people. You want to win in one day. You've been raised on TV shows where problems are solved in 30 minutes. You have the Rambo mentality, you see. And, or you got racial and ethnic groups that are at each other's throats. You're in a political and economic chaotic situation. And therefore, the longer I keep you running and working, and the longer I keep you just running after me, at some point, you're going to collapse from the inside. So then, a great general often uses retreat as a method of war, or guerrilla tactics as a method of war, you see. And it becomes important to us then to recognize that we can use all of the tools available to us as long as we know where we want to go as people. When I develop my organization, I tell people I look for Uncle Toms. Yeah. I want Uncle Toms. I want them to sit right there, and I want the white folk to trust them, implicitly. Because I want them to do what? Push out that information. Give you the intelligence. Some people may have to die with a bad reputation, having the populace thinking that they were traitors because they had to stay in a position to reveal important information so that the people could ultimately win. This is the kind of game that a task-oriented people can be about, that the task-oriented individual is about. You have the other type that is defense-oriented, who's basically concerned with controlling his psychological image or dealing with his fears and anxieties or trying to defend his ego or his self, trying to deal with his pain, but not the problem. And to a good extent, a lot of the kinds of struggles that we are in today are defense-oriented struggles, more concerned with defending our egos and stroking our egos and building our images rather than solving real problems. And you can see this in drug behavior, black-on-black violence. All of these are defense-oriented behaviors, people trying to deal with pain, people trying to deal with frustration, but with the pain of frustration, not with what? The source of their frustration, but with the effects of it. The source of the disease continues to destroy and eat them up as long as they don't feel the pain of the disease. They may think they have solved the problem that's confronting them. That's very dangerous. That's a neurotic pattern. And it's a neurotic approach. And if you look carefully, you'll see that approach being used much too much. Often the individual who's caught up in a defense orientation is one who achieves a reduction of pain by a denying of reality, by a distorting of reality, by a narrowing of his mental field.